Artificial Frontier Artificial Podcast. Frontier Artificial Podcast. Frontier Podcast. Artificial Frontier Artificial Podcast. Frontier Artificial Podcast. Frontier Podcast. Artificial Frontier Artificial Podcast. Frontier Artificial Podcast. Frontier Podcast.
Okay, so are you ready to dive into some seriously weird stuff?
Huh.
Because we are talking psychic spies, government conspiracies, the whole nine yards. You with me?
Oh, absolutely. Let's do it.
All right. So, you know how we've been talking about Cold War secrets and the space race and all that? Well, this turns out there might have been a whole other kind of arms race going on that we never even knew about.
That's right. And it's way more bizarre than anything you could imagine. We're talking about a psychic arms race.
Okay, before we get too far, let's set the scene a bit. So, you provided some really interesting YouTube videos and transcripts about all this. Thanks for that, by the way. But the big question is, was the U.S. government really worried that the Soviets were developing mind control and actual psychic espionage techniques? Like, is this for real?
Yeah, so it might sound like something straight out of a movie, but this fear was very real, and it fueled some pretty wild projects over the years. Think about it. During the Cold War, both sides were obsessed with gaining any advantage over the other, right?
Right. Always trying to be one step ahead.
Exactly. And the U.S. government was particularly concerned that the Soviets were heavily invested in what they called psychotronics.
Psychotronics. Okay, that sounds ominous. Like some kind of mind control ray guns or something.
Yeah.
What exactly are we talking about here?
Basically, it's the idea of using the mind for things like espionage, influencing people, maybe even as a weapon. Imagine if spies could read minds or soldiers could, stop a heart with a thought. It sounds crazy, but the U.S. government took it very, very seriously.
I mean, I can see why they'd be concerned. If the Soviets were really developing psychic weapons, the U.S. couldn't just sit back and let that happen. But where did this fear even come from? Was there anything driving it, or was it just pure Cold War paranoia?
Well, it seems like the U.S. might have gotten a taste of their own medicine in a way. After World War II, there were all these rumors that the Nazis had been really interested in the occult and all that. Like, they'd sent teams all over the world to find mystical artifacts, hoping to gain some kind of edge in the war.
Okay, yeah, I've heard about that. Kind of like Indiana Jones and the Ark of the Covenant, but with Nazis instead.
Exactly. And according to these sources, the U.S. found out that after the war, the Soviets were doing the same thing, scouring for those Nazi occult experts, gathering up any strange artifacts they could get their hands on. So you can imagine how that would freak out the U.S., right? If their biggest rival was exploring this stuff, they had to at least try to keep up.
Yeah, I can see how that would spark a psychic panic for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you even go from worrying about psychic Nazis and Soviets to actually trying to develop these abilities yourself? Where do you even begin?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting. One of the most fascinating figures in all of this is a guy named Lieutenant Colonel Jim Channon. He was a Vietnam War veteran who had this really out there idea. He wanted to create something called the 1st Earth Battalion.
The 1st Earth Battalion. That sounds intense. What was that, like some kind of psychic special forces unit?
In a way, yes. Channon believed that the military could benefit from exploring all sorts of unconventional approaches to warfare. I'm talking about things like meditation, vegetarianism, even using baby lambs to, promote peace and harmony.
Wait, hold on. Baby lambs. Was he serious? What were they supposed to do? Disarm the enemy with their cuteness?
Yeah, no, it sounds crazy, right? Channon's ideas were definitely out there, and a lot of people were skeptical, and understandably so. But his 1st Earth Battalion manual, as strange as it was, it actually gained some traction in certain military circles. It encouraged soldiers to think outside the box, to explore the potential of human consciousness and all that.
Okay, so maybe not baby lambs on the front lines, but the idea was to weaponize mindfulness and peace-loving vibes. I mean, I could see how that would be appealing, especially to soldiers who had experienced the horrors of war firsthand. Like, maybe there's a better way to do this whole war thing.
Yeah. Exactly. And even though some of his specific ideas were a little too out there to be practical, Channon's work opened the door to exploring the unconventional. It created a space for other individuals to really dive headfirst into the world of psychic phenomena and push the boundaries even further. Like this one guy, Major General Albert Stubblebine, talk about pushing boundaries.
Yeah, Stubblebine. Wasn't he the general who kept trying to walk through walls? I swear I read that somewhere.
You're telling me he was absolutely convinced that he could just merge with a wall if he focused hard enough.
I mean, hey, I've definitely tried to will my way through a wall after a long day, but it's never really worked out for me. What was his deal?
Well, he was really into the power of the human mind, right? And he saw psychic abilities as like the next big thing in warfare. Just imagine.
I mean, an army that can walk through walls. Talk about game changer. So where do goats come into all of this? This is the part I'm really curious about.
So Stubblebine wasn't just fixated on walls, you know. The guy was interested in all kinds of psychic abilities. Like he was really fascinated by this idea of using your mind to influence living things.
And that's where the goats come in.
Bingo. It's not totally clear if Stubblebine directly ordered those infamous goat lab experiments at Fort Bragg, but they definitely happened on his watch.
Okay, you're going to have to refresh my memory on that one. Goat lab experiments.
So picture this. You've got all these soldiers, and they're trying to stop the hearts of goats just using their minds.
Okay, now that is just wild. But did it actually work? Like, did anyone actually manage to neutralize a goat with their mind?
That's where the stories get even crazier. We've got all these accounts from people like Glenn Wheaton, this former Green Beret. He claimed to have seen Master Sergeant Michael Acanis, you know, the legendary hand-to-hand combat expert.
Yeah, I think I've heard of him.
So Wheaton said he saw Acanis kill a goat just by staring at it.
Whoa. Okay, now that's some serious mind over matter stuff. But wasn't there something called Project Jedi?
Yeah.
Did this goat incident lead to that?
That's what Wheaton says. According to him, Project Jedi was this top-secret program buried deep within the already super-secret world of psychic research at Fort Bragg.
Layers upon layers of secrecy. So were they training actual Jedi Knights to fight the Soviets with lightsabers and the Force and everything?
Not exactly Jedi Knights like in the movies, but the stuff they were looking into was pretty mind-boggling. Project Jedi was all about something called remote viewing, basically psychic spying.
Well, it's psychic spying, like what, reading minds from a distance?
Kind of. More like imagine closing your eyes, clearing your mind, and then focusing on a specific place or person anywhere in the world. That's what remote viewers believe they can do, tap into some kind of psychic radar and gather information.
So basically, they were aiming for like a psychic Google Earth, but for Cold War espionage.
That's a great way to put it. And some former remote viewers, like this guy Lynn Buchanan, claim to have gotten incredible results.
Oh, right, Buchanan. He was in one of the videos you sent, wasn't he? The one who accidentally caused a power outage because he got angry, and then they decided to recruit him because of it. That's a wild story.
Totally. So Buchanan says they trained him using something called English 1. Another famous remote viewer, Ingo Swann, developed it.
English 1, huh? Sounds pretty intense. What was so special about that method?
Well, it was all about being super systematic, like they were trying to make psychic spying scientific or something. They had all these protocols to try to get rid of any subjectivity. And
make it as objective as possible, kind of like a psychic instruction manual, I get it. But if they were so good at this remote viewing stuff, if they really had this psychic intel advantage, why shut the whole thing down? I mean, that's what I don't get.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Right. It's not every day the CIA just admits defeat, you know, especially when it comes to something this crazy. So what happened?
Officially, Project Stargate, which by then included most of the remote viewing research, was shut down in 1995. They said it was because of inconclusive results.
But that doesn't really make sense, does it? If even a fraction of what these guys are claiming is true.
Exactly. And a lot of the people involved, including Buchanan, they insist that it was way more successful than the government is letting on.
So what, they're covering it up? Is that what they're saying?
Some people definitely think so. It wouldn't be the first time classified information was kept under wraps, right? I mean, can you imagine the public reaction if everyone knew that the U.S. had a team of psychic spies running around?
Okay, fair point. Suddenly, all those spy movies don't seem so far-fetched anymore. But let's say, for argument's sake, that some of this is true. What were these remote viewers actually trying to do? What were they looking at with their minds?
Well, we've got guys like Joe McMoneagle, another military remote viewer. He said they were looking at everything from, you know, where Soviet submarines were going, what was happening at enemy installations, to even trying to locate hostages. Seriously. And we're talking specifics here, right? Not just some vague sense of like, oh, I'm getting bad vibes from this general direction.
Nope, we're talking specifics, like McMoneagle and the Soviet submarine. Supposedly, he gave all these detailed descriptions, even drawings, of this massive double-hulled submarine that U.S. intelligence had never even heard of.
No way. And what happened? Did it pan out?
Get this. At first, they totally dismissed him. They thought he was nuts. They were like, no way, the Soviets can't possibly have that kind of tech.
And
then guess what? satellite imagery confirmed it. There it was, exactly as McMonigle described it.
You're kidding. That's unbelievable. So if it was working, why shut it down? I mean, that seems like proof of concept right there.
Well, there are a few theories floating around. One is just, budget cuts, the Cold War ended, defense budgets got slashed, and maybe remote viewing, even if it works sometimes, just wasn't consistent or reliable enough to justify the cost.
Yeah, I guess it's hard to measure ROI on psychic abilities. It's not exactly something you can track on a spreadsheet. Yeah, it's tough. And some people who were critical of the program said the results were too subjective, too open to interpretation.
But Buchanan said they had like a 68% accuracy rate, right?
Yeah.
Which seems pretty good considering.
Right, and he always said that they weren't the only ones calling the shots. Like, their reports were just one piece of the puzzle, another layer of insight to consider.
An extra tool in the arsenal, even if it is a bit unorthodox. Okay, so what happened to all these psychic spies after the program supposedly ended? Did they just go back to their normal lives?
Not quite. A lot of them, like Buchanan and McMonigle, they actually kept practicing their skills and teaching them to other people. They even wrote books about their experiences.
Wow, so even after all that, they still believed in it.
It seems like it, and it makes you wonder, if the U.S. was really doing all this, what were the Soviets up to?
That's what I want to know. Were they still experimenting with psychic phenomena too?
Some sources say that the Russians never actually stopped their research. In fact, some say they went even further than the U.S., openly training soldiers in all sorts of wild stuff, like psychic combat, intercepting radio waves with their minds, even interrogating people telepathically.
No way. That's even crazier than the stuff we were talking about.
Yeah.
It really makes you wonder what else might be going on right now that we have absolutely no clue about. Are we living in a world where secret psychic warfare is happening all around us?
Yeah.
It's kind of a terrifying thought.
Right. It's definitely a question worth thinking about. The human mind is still a big mystery, and who knows what we're truly capable of. It's both amazing and a little bit unsettling at the same time.
You said it. This whole deep dive has been one crazy story after another. Psychic Nazis, baby lambs, goat labs, psychic spies. It's insane.
And we haven't even gotten to the really out there stuff yet. Like, some people claim they can use remote viewing to actually influence events or even stop their own hearts.
Oh, right. Like Guy Savelli. He was in a couple of the videos you sent, right? The martial arts instructor who claims he can stop hamsters from running on those little wheels just by using his mind.
That's the one.
What a character. We definitely have to talk more about him. It's easy to dismiss all this as crazy talk, but then you remember that this was all part of government-funded research, and it really makes you wonder.
I know, right? Like, what if there's something to it?
Yeah, exactly. It makes you question everything you thought you knew about reality and what the human mind is capable of.
Totally. And that's what I love about this topic. It challenges us to really think outside the box.
Okay, so psychic spies, government cover-ups, weaponized goats.
And hamsters.
Right. Hamsters, of course. It's a lot to wrap our heads around. But let's bring it back to the heart of all this. After all this digging, did we find any actual answers? Did the U.S. Army really develop psychic weapons? Or was this whole thing just a Cold War fever dream?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the truth is, I don't think there's an easy answer. We've got these compelling stories, declassified documents that are mostly blacked out anyway, and all these firsthand accounts that we just can't really verify.
So what do? Just throw our hands up and say, it's all too weird, we give up?
We could, but I think there's another way to look at this. Even if we don't have, undeniable proof that any of these programs achieved what they set out to do, they make us think about some really big questions, what is the human mind truly capable of? And if something like remote viewing is even remotely possible, how do we even begin to think about the ethics of that?
Exactly. I mean, the potential for abuse is huge, right?
Mm-hmm.
Privacy, free will, all of that goes out the window. It's kind of terrifying when you really think about it.
It really is. And that's why I think it's so important to talk about this stuff, to bring it out into the open and have these conversations about the good and the bad that could come from it. Because whether you believe in psychic phenomena or not, the fact that governments were pouring so much money and resources into this research, well, that should tell us something.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
So let's say someone's listening to this and they're thinking, all right, I'm convinced. Sign me up.
Mm-hmm.
Where do I even start with this stuff? Where do you even go to learn more about this?
Honestly, there's actually a surprising amount of information out there, even if a lot of it is stories and speculation. Start with those sources you sent me, those YouTube videos, the declassified documents, the interviews with guys like Buchanan and McMonigle. They've got some pretty wild stories, even if you take them with a grain of salt.
Right. Like, even if only a tiny bit of what they're saying is true, it's still mind-blowing.
Exactly. And don't forget about the historical context here. We're talking about the Cold War, right? A time of crazy paranoia where both sides were desperate for any advantage. That definitely played a huge role in all of this.
Yeah, it's like something out of a spy thriller, but with a little bit of the X-Files mixed in.
Exactly. It's history, it's science, it's the unexplained all rolled into one.
Well said. So as we wrap things up here, I think it's safe to say that we've learned a few things about psychic spies and government secrets. First, the human mind is capable of some pretty incredible things, some things we might never fully understand. And second, the truth can be a lot stranger than fiction, sometimes way stranger.
And maybe the biggest takeaway is that it's good to keep an open mind, question what we think we know, and never stop exploring the boundaries of what's possible.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And who knows, maybe one day we'll have definitive proof that all of this is real. But until then, we'll keep digging for the truth, exploring the weird and the wonderful, one deep dive at a time. Thanks for coming along for the ride, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Artificial Frontier Podcast. Artificial Frontier Podcast. Artificial Frontier Podcast. Artificial Frontier Podcast. Artificial Frontier Podcast.